Hello everyone, AmyR here with Prairie Paper and Ink. This is my 13th video using the Simon Says Stamp Beautiful Flowers stamp set. Definitely my all-time #1 favorite. I pulled it out again. I just can't stop using it. So I will have a link at the very end of the video. I did a playlist with all the videos I've done using this one and the Beautiful Flowers too, because that's also a favorite. But anywho, for today's video, I have some distressed watercolor paper in my MISTI, and I used my MISTI Creative Corner there in the lower right of it to hold the paper up a little bit further in so that I can stamp this huge stamp. And I'm using my anti-static powder tool, brushing off the excess. And then I'm stamping this big stamp with clear embossing ink. You can't see anything. I can't see anything. I just always trust when I'm stamping clear embossing ink on the distressed watercolor paper. I just hope it all turns out, and you find out as soon as you pour the embossing powder on. So I'm making sure that everything's lined up. And then I flipped the paper around and stamped it a second time. And each time I'm stamping it twice just to make sure I get a good impression, because this is a very large, very detailed stamp. So it's basically going to be stamped on the upper left and lower right corner of this piece. So I can't tell until I pour on the emboss powder, but thankfully I didn't mess it up, so we're good to go. And I poured on Simon's Gold embossing powder. This is technically for last week's Color Throwdown challenge, but I'm behind. The new challenge will be up this week. This one's over, but I just, the idea starts coming together and I couldn't not make this card once it all kind of came together in my head. So after I got the embossing powder on and the excess tapped off, I'm going to melt all of this with my heat tool. So just heating it all until it's glossy and melted and metallic and gorgeous. And then for the actual watercoloring, I pulled out my Prima Currents watercolor set. I bought this watercolor palette literally months ago, sometime last year. I can't even remember when. It's gorgeous. It's little like ocean currents, like blues and greens, like pretty. And there was the 2 blues in there that were very close to the colors for this color challenge. So it was just perfect. So that's all I used for these 2 blue little watercolor pans from that palette. And very simple watercoloring. 1 brush, and I'm only coloring the blooms. I'm not coloring the leaves, which for me was this time, I think maybe now that it's my 13th go with this stamp, it's a lot easier, but usually it's very difficult for me to purposely omit, areas, but I wanted to color just the blooms. That's it. So I used the lighter color, and then while it's still wet, I'm going in with the darker color. That's it. No rhyme or reason. I'm not following any sort of rules, light source, anything like that. I just want those colors on there. I move them around, blend them out a little bit. That's it. And then I just flip this around and I do it again. I didn't tape this down or anything. One, I'm not using a ton of water, but I also didn't worry about taping it down because I wanted the full piece colored, because I'm not going to cut this down at all. I'm not going to trim it down like I normally do. And also because I do plan on doing a bit of die cutting though, that will help flatten it out. It is one way to flatten out if you have something really warped from watercoloring. Don't even die cut it. Just put it in between a couple clean pieces of copy paper and then run it through your die cut machine so that the pressure and the plates will just help flatten it. That works. Or the old standby of putting something underneath a pile of books, letting it sit for a day or 2. It's good to go. I don't have the patience for that. So I just run it through my die cut machine. So I did my bit of watercoloring, and yeah, now that I've finally used this palette, I'm like, oh, there's some really pretty colors in here. I'm gonna have to pull it out again. So did the watercoloring, dried it quickly with my heat tool because I want to do a bunch of splatter and I wanted it to be dry so that the splatter didn't just dissolve basically into those blooms. And then for the actual splattering, pulled out my SPLATBOX this time. I don't mind the splatter all over everything, but it's getting to be ridiculous. So pulled out my SPLATBOX, and first I splattered both those watercolors onto this background. And then just the other day, I finally found my little mini mister that has perfect pearl powder with water. That's it. So I just shake it up, and then I'm just using the little tube inside the bottle, like for the nozzle, to splatter. When you do that, you will get larger splatter, just FYI. If you want really fine, light, little tiny splatter, use a brush. You'll get, you know, a little more detail and not the big splats, but I wanted the big splats. I like how those look, especially with the Perfect Pearl mixture because it's just shimmery, you know? So, like I'm doing here, I just keep going. I added a lot of splatter with this. It's just one of those things that as the light catches it, it's so pretty. So did a ton of splatter with that. And then finally, I'm going to add a little bit of white splatter. I'm just using it's Amsterdam white liquid ink. I'll have a link to it. White craft paint works. I've used white gouache. I've shown that in videos. White gouache is great. Picket fence white paint from Ranger. That's amazing too. And like I said, white craft paint also works. But I'm always like, every time there's a new to me white paint type product, I like to get it just to see if, you know, I prefer it. But anyway, use that. I literally just applied it directly to the brush and then tapped the brush, added that little bit of splatter. It's subtle, but it's there. So splattered that on and then let this entire thing dry completely. Don't want to run it through your die cut machine when splatter or paint is wet, mostly because you will transfer all of that to your cutting plates. You'll forget about it. And then you go and die cut something, you know, that's supposed to be white cardstock or whatever. And you end up with all these random splotches and smears and wonder what happened. And it's because your cutting plates are dirty. So yeah, let everything dry. And then I ran this through my die cut machine with one of the A2 thin frames wafer dies. So I taped it carefully with washi tape, ran it through my die cut machine, and then I carefully removed the washi tape to make sure it didn't tear anything. And then I'm going to remove that frame from the frame wafer die just using my little craft pick. And then I'm going to set this aside because this is going to come into play when I start actually assembling the card front. But I can't assemble a card front till I get the card base ready. So I have a piece of Simon's Smoke cardstock, and I'm going to cut this in half lengthwise. So it's going to be 4 1/4 by 11. So cut that in half, and then I will score it at 5 1/2. So this will be a top folding A2 size card. So I'm going to score this with my little score buddy and my Teflon bone folder, and then just kind of reinforce that fold with the bone folder. And I left the stamp in my MISTI this entire time, exactly where I placed it for the card front. Because as I was creating, I was like, ooh, this will be perfect for the inside of the card. So I'm going to do the exact same thing to the inside of the card. So I folded the card base inside out, and then I'm going to stamp the same way, but this time I'm going to use Simon's Smoke ink. It looks darker right now when it's like freshly stamped. It will lighten up a bit as it fully dries, soaks into the cardstock, etc. So it'll be a little more subtle, a lot easier to write over. I just thought I'd point that out because looking at it in editing, it's a lot darker than it looks now. But either way, it's pretty. So I did the exact same thing, flipped it around, stamped it again. So now the inside's just about done because it's just, there's nothing else that really needs to be done there. So to assemble my card front, I have the panel I did and die cut. I'm adhering the outside portion first, which is some craft tacky glue. And then I had die cut another frame from that same smoke gray cardstock. So I'm adding adhesive right along the inside of this outer portion and then on the inside. It looks like a lot of adhesive. It's not. I'm not really squeezing the bottle. Just kind of making sure I get a bunch of it there, but it's not like a thick blob of adhesive because you don't want it oozing out everywhere. So I inlaid the gray frame and then the center portion, and then the piece of frame that's left over that's like watercolored. I'm going to add the adhesive to that, and I'm going to line it up on the inside of the card base with that stamping. I love when these just kind of work. It's such a subtle little thing, but it just finishes off the inside of the card. So once I've got that adhered, and I've sped this up, obviously I'm working like super fast in post-editing here. Sometimes I wish I could work this fast in real life, but regardless, honestly, if I could work this fast in real life, I would probably severely hurt myself, or like, who knows, it would just be a mess. Anyway, I pulled out the thank you script wafer die. This is another favorite of mine. I die cut the words 3 times, stacked them together with the craft tacky glue, and then I die cut the base, adhered it all together. And then there's a little companion sentiment. I pulled out I think it's called Happy Everyday something. I'll have a link to it. These are the pre-printed sentiment cards that Simon does that I didn't use for the longest time, and now I find I'm reaching for them all the time because it's so convenient to just grab one, trim it down, adhere it to a card, which is exactly what I did here. So I've got the thank you word and then the little strip that says, "You make me so happy." So I'm going to adhere the die cut sentiment just with that same craft tacky adhesive. Once that's adhered into place, I'm just going to use my little tiny Derice foam strips and cut them down into a couple pieces so that I can adhere this little sentiment strip right below the words. And then of course, I'm going to add some bling. Gotta have more bling. So I have some Studio Caudia, I have some golden crystals, and I have the Ocean Waves crystal mix, which FYI, the Ocean Wave, online they look more blue. In real life, they're more of like a turquoise sort of color. They're gorgeous. I've used them in so many videos. Same with the gold ones. I've used them in a ton of videos. So sprinkled those throughout the card. I adhered them into place with craft tacky glue. As a final little bit of embellishment, I pulled out the Nouveau Jewel drops in Sea Breeze. I haven't used my Nouveau drops in forever. I have probably every single color. These ones are transparent or translucent, so they dry clear but with the tint of color. So these dry clear, like see-through, with that little tint of blue to them. So I just added a few of them here and there throughout this card, and then obviously have to let them dry. That's usually why I don't use them as often, because I'm just running behind with life. But anyway, added these to my card and that finished it off. So as always, I will have a link below the video to my blog post. I will have a supply list. I'll link to all the supplies I used. I'll have picture links on my blog. You can check it all out in the description box below the video if you're interested. Thank you all so much for watching and subscribing and thumbs upping and commenting. I really appreciate it. And I will see you all very soon in the next video. Bye.